who are lawful U.S. residents, we've clarified that they will be able to apply for a PPP using their individual taxpayer identification number, or ITINs. Next slide, please. So between February 24th to March 9th, 2021, and this is that restricted application period for businesses and nonprofits with fewer than 20 employees. So that's an exclusive PPP loan application period for those businesses. Now, of course, we received the question as to whether or not that period is going to be extended. And as far as we know, as of today, it is not going to be extended. The reason being that we have small businesses with fewer than 20 employees, but they are not Schedule C filers. They may be filing this Form 1065 or an 1120S or an 1120, and yet they have fewer than 20 employees. So that this period would apply to them. So we're dealing with two dynamics. There's the restrictive application period, but there's also a revision in how sole proprietors, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals can now calculate their loan amount. So Schedule C filers have the option of using their gross income from line 7 on their Schedule C, or their net income from line 31 on their Schedule C. So you might ask, why was this change made? It was made because we recognize that with using line 31, it restricted the amount that a Schedule C filer would be able to apply to get for their loan, okay? Also, using line 31 did not take into consideration the expenses that a sole proprietor, independent contractor, or a self-employed individual would have to pay, regardless of whether or not they did any business or their business increased. There were expenses that you had to pay to keep your business operating. So in using line 7 rather to calculate your gross income, then that allows you to be able to take advantage of that amount in calculating your total loan amount. Now, for Schedule C filers with no employees, then there's no adjustment that you would need to make to line 7. However, if you are a Schedule C filer and you have employees, then the amount on line 7 would have to be adjusted to reduce or deduct rather those employee related expenses, like what's reflected on line 14, line 19, and line 26, because you would have captured that under that employee's amount when you submit your application. It is important to note that this recalculation is not retroactive. So what does that mean? That means if your loan has been approved, then you cannot go back and recalculate your loan amount. If your loan has been dispersed, you cannot go back and recalculate your loan amount. So the restriction, as I mentioned, preventing small business owners with prior non-fraud felony convictions has been eliminated as relates to the PPP. Previously, if you had a felony conviction within the past year, then you would not be eligible for a PPP. That's now been eliminated if it is a non-fraud related conviction. And we've removed that restriction that prevented small business owners who had delinquent or defaulted federal student loans from being eligible. So those are some of the enhancements that have been put in place so that we can ensure to the best of our ability that those individuals in the socioeconomic groups and our women-owned businesses have an opportunity to take advantage of the PPP. So the intent was to reduce the barriers that those businesses were suffering to accessing the PPP loan and expanding the amount for which they are eligible. Next slide, please. So regarding our non-citizens who are lawful US residents, basically like green card holders, those with an individual taxpayer identification number, they can now apply for PPP. Now, I want you to realize that even though we've made these enhancements, you must still meet the other eligibility criteria, basically being an eligible business entity in order to apply for a PPP. Additional funding has been estimated at approximately $1 billion, and additional funding will be set aside for sole proprietors, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals who have no employees and are located in low and moderate income areas. So when we're speaking of the low and moderate income areas, we're using the definition that IRS uses. So we do have new applications for the borrowers for the PPP loan, and there are new applications for the lenders. The interim final rule was posted yesterday, March 3rd, and we are still developing some additional guidance. Now, one of the things that was happening with PPP round 1 is that we would receive calls or emails from CPAs who had assisted someone in completing a PPP application, and they wanted the lender to pay them for completing that application. Please understand that lenders are only obligated to pay agent fees if the lender entered into an agreement with that agent. Otherwise, if you're looking for payment, the borrower is responsible for any agent fees. So the lender is not obligated to pay you if they did not have an agreement with you. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the interim final rule, which are the revisions to the loan amount calculation and eligibility, was effective March 3rd, 2021. The updated application forms have been posted to SBA's website. So the SBA Form 2483 for first draw borrower application is available. Also, the SBA Form 2483 SD for the second draw application is available. Now, it is important to know that when we talk about the calculation that you will use either 2.5 times your payroll cost or 2 or 3.5 times your payroll cost, the 3.5 times your payroll cost only applies to the second draw application. I make mention of that because we received a question from someone saying that I applied for my PPP loan in the hospitality industry. I run a restaurant, but the application that the lender has only has 2.5 times my payroll cost and not the 3.5 times my payroll cost. That's because you're applying for your first draw, and the 3.5 times, if you're in the hospitality industry, only applies to your second draw. If you are a Schedule C filer using your gross income, then you're going to use the borrower application form 2483C. And if you're a Schedule C filer using your gross income, you're going to use 2483 SD for second draw, C for Schedule C. And then, of course, for the lenders, we have the 2484 lender application for guarantee and the 2484 SD for the second draw lender application. Next slide, please. And all of those forms are available on our website. Some additional things available to you is that we have broadened the use of the PPP funds. So what that means is that there are additional expenses which are allowable for forgiveness. Now, keep in mind that what has not changed is that no less than 60% of the amount of the loan must go toward payroll, and no more than 40% of the amount of the loan can go toward allowable expenses. Now, under PPP round one, you could only use the funds for utilities, rent or lease payments, and mortgage interest payments and payroll. That was it. On the PPP round two, we've expanded that to include those items, but also include covered operations expenditures. So that can include your business software costs. You may have had to invest into some additional software because now your employees are teleworking and you didn't have the software available or necessary to manage that, or cloud computing costs, or you may have had to hire someone to handle payroll services and tracking costs because now you've moved to this virtual environment. So those would be considered covered operations expenditures. Also, if you had covered property damage costs, and those costs, property damage would be costs related to damages to your property as a result of civil unrest in 2020. And these would be costs that were not covered by your insurance. That's an allowable expense. And supplier costs. So these would be payments that you had to make to suppliers for the delivery of materials or other supplies to your business. Next slide, please. Some additional eligible expenses includes covered work protection expenditures. So on the PPP round one, we received a lot of calls about, where can I use the funds for personal protective equipment or PPE? Well, of course, the answer was no, because that was not an allowable expense under the CARES Act. Now, under the Economic Aid Act, that has been added. So if you have to use funds for this disposable personal protective equipment, that is now an allowable forgivable cost. Also, if you invest in capital expenditures, like you had to put in a sneeze guard, or if you had to make improvements to reduce the amount of contact between your employees and your customers, and you may have done that by means of installing a drive-through window, that's an eligible expense. And some newly eligible payroll costs that are paid by the employer, which would include life insurance premiums as an eligible payroll cost. But keep in mind that has to be something paid by the employer and not where you're deducting that. You're an employer and you're deducting that from the employee's wages. The Economic Aid Act also clarifies that health benefits includes dental, vision, and disability insurance payments that are paid by the employer. Next slide, please. So we have some new eligible entities, and these are nonprofit organizations that qualify under 501c6 of the IRS code. Okay, so this would include those organizations, nonprofit organizations that have membership fees. They can include business leagues, our chambers of commerce, real estate boards, and boards of trade. However, it excludes professional sports leagues and organizations that promote or participate in a political campaign or similar activities. The additional eligibility criteria for these organizations are that they must have no more than 300 employees. They cannot receive more than 15% of their receipts from lobbying activities, nor can more than 15% of their total activities be comprised of lobbying activities. And when looking at the cost of lobbying activities of this organization, those costs cannot exceed $1 million during the most recent tax year that ended prior to February 15, 2020. Next slide, please. Additional newly eligible entities are housing co-ops, as well as destination marketing organizations that meet the IRS nonprofit standard for 501c6. So this would include like those nonprofit organizations or political subdivisions that market and promote communities and facilities to businesses for leisure travelers, or for conventions, or it could be a visitor bureau. So in order to qualify, these organizations cannot have more than 300 employees. That 15% requirement for not receiving more than 15% of its receipts from lobbying activities also apply to the destination marketing organizations, as well as them not using more than $1 million for lobbying activities. Next slide, please. News organizations, including those operating under FCC licenses, may be eligible, but there are certain requirements they must meet. So generally, they must fall under NAICS code 51110 or Major Group 5151. They cannot have more than 500 employees, or if they have multiple locations, not more than 500 employees at one location. Next slide, please. So let's look at what remains the same under the Economic Aid Act. Next slide, please. We still have, of course, the PPP program, which has been enhanced to allow for those who would not otherwise qualify, be eligible for PPP, and also to reduce some of those barriers that kept those businesses from being eligible. Debt relief is still available, where SBA is paying making your monthly loan payments on a 7A, a 504, or a micro loan that is in good standing, meaning that you're current, you're not deferred or in default on that loan. The EIDL, Economic Injury Disaster Loan, is still available. We are accepting applications for the EIDL loans until December 31st, 2021. And we also have the targeted EIDL advance. So please understand, notice the word targeted. That means that that's only available to certain individuals who have submitted an EIDL application by December 31st, 2020, and had received no EIDL advance or did not receive the full $10,000 EIDL advance. There is no open portal for the EIDL advance. And for the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, or the SVOG, that application period has not opened yet. Next slide, please. So under PPP, some key takeaways. We've expanded the use of funds for you that would be eligible for forgiveness, as I just mentioned. You can select a covered period between 8 weeks and 24 weeks. It's up to you to choose which covered period you want to use, but that covered period has to be a minimum of 8 weeks. We're offering a second draw loan option for the hardest hit small businesses. That's going to include those that suffered at least a 25% loss in revenues. It allows for you to deduct the expenses that were paid by your PPP loan on your federal taxes. Now, this is an IRS standard. Previously, you could not deduct those expenses on your tax returns if you paid those expenses with your PPP loan. And we're updating the forgiveness process for loans up to $150,000. Now, keep in mind, even though there have been some rumblings about forgiveness on loans up to $150,000 without your applying, that is not going to happen. You must apply for forgiveness in order for your application to be forgiven, because the majority of the PPP loans that were submitted in 2020, 86% were for loans up to $150,000. So you have to apply for forgiveness. It's not automatic. And we will no longer subtract your EIDL advance from your PPP loan forgiveness amount. Next slide, please. So what's the first draw? A first draw loan is basically an applicant who did not receive a PPP loan prior to August 9th, 2020. We've added additional types of entities that are eligible for a first draw loan. We've expanded the covered expenses, as I mentioned. But keep in mind, even though it's a covered expense, the total expenses cannot exceed 40%. Now, if and your payroll must equal to or be greater than 60%, and we do not round up. So if you were at 57%, then you already know that your PPP forgiveness application is going to be deducted. Now, I mentioned you get to select the use of proceeds. The period in which you will use your proceeds between 8 weeks or 24 weeks after disbursement. However, it has to be at a minimum of 8 weeks. So you can't say I'm gonna use all my money up in 4 weeks and then so that I can apply for a second draw loan. No, it has to be a minimum of 8 weeks over which you use those funds. And keep in mind, this program is Paycheck Protection Program. That means that you are required to pay your employees regardless of whether or not you have work for them to do or they're coming to work. There are certain borrowers who may request an increase to their original PPP loan amount. That would include someone like a partnership who only use the employees' salaries to calculate their PPP loan, but not their partnership payment or their payment as a partner. Or it could be someone who had returned a portion of their funds prior to December 26, 2020. Or it could be someone who returned all of the funds and the lender marks the application as canceled, not paid in full, because if it's marked paid in full, you'd have to apply for a second draw loan. But if it's marked canceled, then you would be applying for a first draw loan. So there are some limited instances where you may be able to get an increase on your original PPP loan amount. You must have been in business as of February 15, 2020, and your application must be submitted in the loan application portal on or before March 31st, 2021 rather. This is a significant change because previously the loan had to be approved by August 8, 2020. Now your application only has to be submitted in the portal by March 31st, 2021. So it's important that you work with your lender to make sure your application is submitted by that due date. Next slide, please. So for your first draw application, of course, you must meet the size standard for your industry. So if you're in services or construction or retail trade, your size standard is going to be determined by your gross average annual receipts over a 3-year period or a 5-year period. If you're a regular dealer or wholesaler or a manufacturer, your size standard is going to be determined by your average number of employees for the past 12 months. So I've already covered the newly eligible entities, but just to mention that regardless of your business structure, be it sole proprietor, independent contractor, or self-employed, or if you're a partnership, corporation, or an LLC, you are still eligible to apply for a PPP, as well as our nonprofit organizations under 501c3, our veterans organizations, and our tribal businesses are still eligible. Next slide, please. So for a second draw loan, this applies to those individuals who received a first draw loan under the round one, and they've used all of their funds. So a question had been asked, okay, so what if I didn't get a first draw loan in round one by August 8, 2020? Can I get a second draw PPP loan? Well, now it's too late, because remember, your loan proceeds must have been used over a minimum of 8 weeks. So with us, the program closing on March 31st, 2021, then you won't be able to meet that minimum 8-week period. You would have had to apply for your first draw PPP back by the end of January in order to meet that minimum 8-week period. And before your second draw loan could be dispersed, you must have used all of the proceeds. So that being said, in order to qualify for a second draw PPP loan, in addition to meeting that requirement and having used all the proceeds, you must have 300 employees or less, and you must be able to demonstrate that you've suffered a 25% reduction in gross receipts, gross revenues over comparable quarters. And these are calendar quarters between 2019 and 2020. Okay, so the maximum loan amount for your second draw loan is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll costs for 2019 or 2020. You get to choose up to $2 million. If you are in the accommodation or food services sector, those industries under major group 7.2, for a second draw loan, then you can use 3.5 times your average monthly payroll cost for 2019 or 2020, up to $2 million. And you would be submitting the SBA Form 2483SD borrow application when applying for the second draw PPP. So remember, I said 3.5 times your monthly payroll cost only applies to the second draw application, and if you are in the accommodation or food services industry, like your hotels or your restaurants. Next slide, please. So the additional eligibility, as I mentioned, you must have previously received a first draw loan, and your covered periods cannot overlap, and your first draw loan must have been fully dispersed, and you must have used all of the funds prior to your second draw loan being eligible to be dispersed, and you must be able to demonstrate that you suffered at least a 25% reduction in your gross receipts. And when we say quarter to quarter, we're talking about comparable calendar quarters. So you don't just get to choose 3 months that you want to use. It has to be a calendar quarter, either January, February, March, April, May, June, or July, August, and September. Next slide, please. So some additional PPP requirements as we're looking at forgiveness. And I always say, apply with forgiveness in mind. That means you know what it is for which you can use the proceeds. You know going in that at least 60% or no less than 60% of the loan must have been used for payroll. And forgiveness is going to be based upon your maintaining or quickly rehiring employees. You're maintaining their salary and wage level, which means you can't reduce their salary, and rather that there is no reduction in the full-time head count. So a question that will come up is, does it have to be the same person? No, it does not. If somebody leaves and you need to hire someone else to replace that person to maintain that head count, then you want to do that. If you want full forgiveness of the principal amount, then that means that no more than 40% was used for eligible expenses and no less than 60% for payroll. And I'm happy to say, based upon information provided to us on Tuesday, at least 99% of the forgiveness applications that have been submitted have been processed, and the applicants received full forgiveness. So start this process with forgiveness in mind, being mindful of how you can use those proceeds. Next slide, please. If the loan is not forgiven, then it will be subject to a fixed interest rate of 1% over either a 5-year period or a 2-year period. If your loan was approved before June 5th, then your maturity is going to be 2 years unless you're able to work with your lender to get them to extend it to 5 years. There are no fees or prepayment penalties associated with this loan. No requirement or personal guarantees are required. No requirement for collateral, rather, or personal guarantees is required. And once the lender is notified that your loan has not been forgiven, the lender will notify you of that, and then you'll have to start paying those monthly payments once the lender notifies you. If you do not submit forgiveness within 10 months after the last day of your covered period, remember your covered period is either 8 weeks or 24 weeks. If you do not submit a forgiveness application within 10 months after the last day of your covered period, then the loan will not be forgiven. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, you must apply for forgiveness through your lender, and the lender will submit their forgiveness decisions to SBA. You want to make sure that you are providing the lender all of the information that lender is requesting to process your lender application. By way of reminder, we are not deducting your EIDL advance from your forgiveness application, and the expenses paid with your PPP loan funds are deductible. So this is an IRS standard. You want to consult the IRS website. Next slide, please. And the forgiveness loans are not taxable. You can deduct those expenses paid with your PPP loan. However, if you pay business taxes with your PPP loans funds, that is not a forgivable expense. So if you use your PPP loan to pay your business taxes, that amount will not be forgiven. Something else that's an IRS standard, and I'm only providing this just for information purposes. If you have questions regarding this, then you need to consult the IRS website. So you can claim the employee retention tax credit provided it meets the IRS requirements. Excuse me. You cannot claim wages paid, excuse me, with a forgiven PPP loan. You must continue to pay the employees despite your being temporarily shut down because of the pandemic or suffering a 20% drop in gross receipts compared with the same quarter in the prior year. And the credit is good on qualified wages paid up to July 1st, 2021. Next slide, please. So for the EIDL, keep in mind that the EIDL is a working capital loan for which you can apply through December 31st, 2021. Now, this being a working capital loan is intended for you to be able to meet your normal operating expenses, such as a continuation of health care benefits for your employees or rent, utilities, fixed debt payments. You cannot use the EIDL to pay off any debts, but you can use it to make your monthly payments. You cannot use it to purchase property or expand property or do renovations to your property or purchase any additional equipment. It's intended to meet current working capital needs. For businesses, it's a 30-year loan at a fixed rate of 3.75%, and for nonprofits, 2.75%. This is a direct loan from SBA. There is no prepayment penalty, and there are no fees associated with your applying for an EIDL. Now, if the loan is over $25,000, it will be secured by a UCC filing. And because we're charged $100 for that filing, $100 will be deducted from your loan proceeds. You must meet the size standard for the type of business in which you operate. Next slide, please. The targeted EIDL advance, and notice targeted. As I mentioned, there is no open portal for the EIDL advance. Someone sent a question or an email or text saying, I went to the EIDL portal and there's no way for me to apply for an EIDL advance. No, there is not, because there's no open portal. Targeted means we're sending invitations to those who had submitted an EIDL application by December 26, 2020, and priority one includes those who did not receive the full $10,000 in EIDL advance, okay, and they're in a low income community and they suffered greater than 30% economic loss and they have 300 or fewer employees. That's the basic eligibility criteria. Those companies will receive an invitation from SBA to complete their targeted EIDL advance application. We're encouraging you to have your 2019 tax returns handy to use to complete the forms for which you'll have to complete and submit, because you'll choose an 8-week period that you want to use to compare between 2019 and 2020 to support that greater than 30% economic loss. You get to choose. So it'll be good to have your 2019 tax returns handy. If you applied for an EIDL and the advance funds had already been exhausted, because those exhausted back in July 2020, you didn't receive an EIDL advance. You will receive an invitation to apply for the full EIDL advance if you meet the requirements I just mentioned. So there, as I mentioned, there is no open portal. We, SBA, will reach out to you. And we started that process about 2 weeks ago, where we sent out 100,000 invitations. And then this week we sent out some more. So if you haven't received yours yet and you're in priority group 1, stay tuned. We won't move to priority group 2 until we've taken care of everyone in priority group 1. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, have your 2019 federal tax return handy. Make sure that the employee identification number matches what you have on your original EIDL application. Make sure that the name on your original EIDL application and the name that's on the business bank account matches. If you have moved since you submitted your application, you will need to be able to provide documentation to SBA regarding that move and when you moved. You use your monthly gross receipts for 2019 and 2020 and completed months in 2021. So there's going to be a form that you're going to have to complete. Now notice we're saying gross receipts. So if it helps you to refer to that as gross sales or gross revenues, do so. This does not say expenses. If you make an error on submitting your application and it's denied, there is no appeal process. So please pay particular attention to what you are submitting to us. And we want you to check your bank account to make sure that everything is current and accurate. Now, once you submit your EIDL, targeted EIDL advance application via that invitation, then you will receive in a later email the request for you to go into your portal and complete and sign the 4506T request for transcript. SBA will request your transcript from IRS for your 2019 tax returns. If you have not filed your 2019 tax returns, you will not be eligible for the targeted EIDL advance. Next slide, please. So once it's submitted, you can only submit one application for the targeted EIDL advance. So that's why you want to make sure that everything is correct, that you review the bank account information, because if the routing number is not wrong or the account number is wrong, that means when it's time to deposit your funds, there'll be nothing there for you. And as I mentioned, ensure that everything is 100% correct. Even though our goal to complete processing of these applications is 21 days, with the volume of EIDL applications we still have, and with the disasters we suffered in 2020, and now the recent disasters as a result of the ice storms, our team is strapped, they're pulled pretty thin, and the processing center is in Fort Worth. So Fort Worth was shut down because of no electricity, no heat, and loss of internet. So we're just asking that you will be patient with us as we process these targeted EIDL advance applications. Next slide, please. So for the shuttered venue operators grant, the application period is not open. You will need to have, if you're a shuttered venue operator, you will need to have an active SAM registration. There is no fee to complete your SAM registration. You will go to www.sam.gov to complete your SAM registration. You will need to have your employee identification number from IRS, your Dun & Bradstreet number or DMB number from Dun & Bradstreet, and a business bank account in order to complete your SAM registration. If you get on a site and they are asking you for a credit card, you're on the wrong site. Please exit immediately. You do not have to pay. You must have been in business as of February 29th, 2020 in order to apply for or be eligible for the SVOG. You cannot receive an SVOG if you've applied for a PPP. Next slide, please. So this next slide just gives you a graph of how the program works. Now notice that you cannot have, well, if you had a PPP and it was in the first draw, prior to December 27, 2020, you can apply for an SVOG. However, if you apply for a PPP now, you are not eligible for an SVOG if you meet the eligibility criteria. If you have an EIDL, you're eligible for an SVOG. However, you cannot use the SVOG for the same purposes for which you use the EIDL. And the same business cannot apply for more than one EIDL. Next slide, please. So we are still providing debt relief, and what that means is that SBA is making the payments to our borrowers that were in good standing, meaning that you're current on your loan, or your loan's not in deferment. And it applies to our 7A loans, 504, and our micro loans. There is nothing that you need to do. SBA is working directly with the lender. However, since the lender is the one who made the loan and SBA is guaranteeing it, okay, your debt relief questions should be submitted to your lender. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you an idea of everything that SBA has going on. That's what this slide shows. Our webinars and workshops that we have coming up, and there's no fee to participate in these webinars. So we're doing the second Paycheck Protection Program webinar now, okay? And I would encourage you to take advantage, if you're interested in government contracting, of the webinar that SJB Group is hosting tonight at 6 o'clock. And on March 5th, we have a tax saving strategies webinar. As I mentioned, there's no fee to attend any of these. All you have to do is to register. Now, for those, someone has asked about financing. If you don't qualify for PPP or EIDL, we have an Access to Capital webinar that we're doing next week on March 10th with the SBDC at Southeastern Louisiana University. Next slide, please. And this is a continuation of all that we have that we're doing this month. And there are two other things that I just couldn't fit on the slide. But if you go to sba.gov/Louisiana and check out our calendar of events, you will be able to see everything that we have planned for March and beyond. Next slide, please. So we want you to stay connected with us. So sign up for our newsletters at sba.gov/updates. All we ask of you is that you put in your email address and your zip code. You can also follow the Louisiana District Office on Twitter at SBA_Louisiana. You can email us at louisiana@sba.gov, or you can call our main number at 504-589-6685. And that number is staffed by at least 3 people who are retrieving any messages left and returning the calls generally the same day. Next slide, please. This is my contact information. I trust that the information that I've shared is beneficial to you. That concludes the formal presentation. So Kenyatta, we can take questions now. Kenyatta?
Oh, I'm here, Ms. Joe. I was just deliberating on whether or not I'm gonna leave your contact information up there for a little bit longer.
That's good.
That way they can get it. And obviously, anybody that's in attendance, they can email me as well. I put my information in the chat area, so that way you all can obtain that also. And then I'll be able to provide you Ms. Joe's information because I'm sure you may have other questions as these available, the funding assistance is out there. So let's go ahead and get to the questions. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start the ones, Ms. Joe, that we have received prior to, if you don't mind.
That's fine.
And I'll do my best of reading them off, and then obviously we'll let Ms. Joe address them. And perfect timing. We hope to get all of the questions in again. As I mentioned earlier, if we can address all the questions live, they will be addressed in written form. And if there is any that comes to me, even following the webinar, I would do my best to get with Ms. Joe or someone on her staff to be able to address those questions. So the first one we have is, I'm a sole proprietor with no additional employees. I have applied and received the first and second PPP loan / grants, but noticed, and then I'm gonna read what he said, what's the highlighted areas, but notice in the highlighted text that I could receive more financial support by revising the PPP's funding formula. How do I do that if I've already filed and received the second PPP loan?
Okay, so under the interim final rule that was posted and went into effect on March 3rd, 2021, these changes are not retroactive. So if your loan has already been approved, or if it's been dispersed, you cannot go back and ask to recalculate the amount of your loan. So since it's been approved and dispersed, you can't go back. And that's covered in the interim final rule that was published yesterday.
Is that rule, Ms. George, just a little sidebar, is that available for public viewing or?
Oh yeah, it is. In fact, it's on our website, but I can send that to you, Kenyatta.
Okay.
Yes, it's available. Yeah, it was
Good.
published in the Federal Register yesterday, but I can send it to you.
That would be great, because I can also post that to our site when we put the recording and the slides on there, as well as when I send an email out to all the attendees also.
Okay, sounds good.
Next question we have, there's 3 questions. I believe the way that I received this is from the same firm.
Okay.
So the first part of their question is regarding Schedule C borrowers who use line 7 to determine PPP loan amount and who have greater than 150,000 in gross income. How does SBA make the determination that a borrower lacked an adequate basis for the required certifications concerning the necessity of the loan request?
So we will look at whether or not there were any reserves to which the borrower had access, or if the borrower actually suffered a loss in revenues, basically that their business had to shut down, or if their business didn't shut down, if they suffered a loss. So there are a couple of things. Did you have any cash reserves that you could use? Or was your business negatively impacted? Because not all businesses were negatively impacted by the pandemic. Some of them did very well, and others continued business as usual. So I look at like the construction industry. If you look at like DOTD, they were able to get a lot more contracts awarded because nobody was on the road. And so if you were doing business with the federal government still had work going on their sites. Even if you were in the service industry and you were doing work for the federal government, they still had people working. So it just depends on a case-by-case basis. So if you're referring to that requirement that's in the interim final rule, where it speaks about $150,000, they make mention of that just to let everyone know whose line 7 was $150,000 or more, that there's no safe harbor for you. So the safe harbor generally applied to those whose loans were $2 million or more. So we already know that SBA is going to look at those loans. But for those that had less than $2 million, then it was presumed that we would not. However, as addressed in the interim final rule, if you're a Schedule C filer and your line 7 is 150,000 or more, then you would be subject to a random review. And the necessity requirement has not gone away. That's still in place.
Okay. Regarding the cap on the amount of loan forgiveness available for owner own payroll compensation. Am I understanding correctly that in order for them to receive full forgiveness, their covered period must be at least 2.5 months? They have a continuation to that. If this is true, then how can a 2021 first draw borrower receive full forgiveness if they apply for a second draw loan 2 weeks after receiving funds from their first draw?
Okay, so with the way that's written, keep in mind that the way the Economic Aid Act is written, it specifies a minimum of 8 weeks. That's why I made the statement that you can't get the loan and say, okay, I'm going to use this up in a couple of weeks or in a month and then go back and apply for a second draw, because the regulations and interim final rule prohibits that. You have to use the funds over a minimum period of 8 weeks. So if you did not get your first draw loan in round one, or if your loan was not approved and dispersed by the end of January, chances are you're not going to meet that minimum 8-week period. So you won't be eligible for a second draw loan. Now, as if you're a Schedule C filer, there is a limit on how much that can be used for your salary, and I believe it's $20,833. I can check that, but there is a limit on how much you can use as a Schedule C filer for your salary. Did that take care of all of them?
I think so, because I'm gonna read the third question, because you may have addressed that just now in the conclusion of what your answer at the end of your answer. So, can a borrower apply for a second draw within 8 weeks of receiving a first draw if a first draw funds are spent on eligible expenses? And then they followed up, can covered periods overlap? If not,
No,
okay.
no, right.
If not, am I understanding correctly that a borrower cannot apply for a second draw within 8 weeks of the first draw loan and still have the first loan fully forgiven? Otherwise, the covered periods would overlap, because a covered period begins on date of this disbursement and ends on any period between 8 to 24 weeks after disbursement date. So I'm assuming that when you answered that just now.
Right, and that is correct. Right. Now, in order to be fully forgiven, the funds must have been used for allowable expenses, no less than 60% for payroll and no more than 40% for eligible expenses.
Okay. Excuse me. Can the PPP disaster loan be used to pay off the mortgage of business? The building is not my residence.
No, that's not an allowable expense. So you cannot use the PPP loan to pay off a mortgage. The only thing that you can use a PPP loan for as it relates to a mortgage would be to make the mortgage interest payments. If you use that PPP loan to pay off the mortgage, the loan will not be forgiven.
Gotcha. Last one here, and then I'm gonna go to our questions that's live.
Mm-hmm.
I own and operate a hosted B&B in Louisiana. I live in Los Angeles. Am I eligible to receive PPP? I have paid taxes, insurance, maintenance, and housekeeping without customers in the past year.
Okay, so regarding that, the eligible bed and breakfast, if it's one of the eligible entities, and it is, you can apply for a PPP. Now, keep in mind that the amount of your PPP is going to be determined by, what tax forms you file. So whatever it is, if it's Schedule C, it's going to be based upon, your either line 7 or line 31. If you're 1065 or 1120S or S Corp, it's going to be based upon what's on your Schedule your Schedule K and your employee records. So just keep that in mind.
All right. We'll start at the very top, out of all fairness. Okay, so here we go. Filing for a second PPP. Well, this may be the individual, but I'm gonna read it. It might be one. Filing
Okay.
for a second PPP, second draw of PPP is I guess, am I correct in understanding that I can take the total from line 7 of my Schedule C, divide that by 12 to get my average monthly income, and multiply the average monthly income amount by 3.5, since I'm in the food industry and my NAICS begins with the numbers 722.
So it would be 2.5 times the payroll cost. As it relates to dividing it by 12. I need to look at the calculation that's in the interim final rule. I mean, it's a lot that I have committed to memory, but I haven't looked at each industry classification or each structure to see how they calculate that. So if the interim final rule says divide that by 12, then that's what you'll do. And then you'll multiply it by 2.5. But I'd have to, I have to check that and what's in the interim final rule.
And whoever, the individual that asked that question, if that didn't address what you wanted to know, just send me an email. And that would give Ms. Jo some time to, have her or her staff do some due diligence on their end and find the answer for you for that.
Yeah, and I can, because I've just pulled up the interim final rule to send to you, Kenyatta. So yeah, if he sends his email or she sends her email, we'll get that answer right out to them today.
Thank you. Because remember, Ms. Jo has been, doing, she's been definitely staying on top. Her and her staff have been doing their due diligence to stay on top of all of the updates. And again, that's why I'm happy we were able to do what we're doing today, because we were meeting yesterday evening, and I think it was like an hour or so before we met, they had a new addition.
Right, it just came out yesterday. Yeah, that's right.
So we, that's why we say it's ongoing. However, you have what's current right now, and we will. Ms. Jo is going to do her very best to address to the best of her ability based off what's current. So let me get back to the questions, because we're doing pretty good on time here.
Okay, so let me just answer him. Okay. It does say divide the amount by 12. Okay, so if they're using either line 7 or line 31, they would divide the amount by 12. So it does say that, and we could send that to them so they'll have it. But go ahead, Kenyatta.
Great, thank you, Ms. Jo. So I have so what is the best way to calculate my PPP loan? I had 10 independent contractors in 2019, and now I have 5 employees. I'm a Schedule C tax filer. Most of my revenue is from April to November, as I work in the tourism industry.
Okay, so first of all, you cannot count those independent contractors as employees. That's from the interim final rules that were published last year in 2020 as a result of the CARES Act. So you cannot use independent contractors towards your payroll. Now, in calculating your PPP loan with your employees, then of course, you're going to use your payroll records to calculate the amount of your PPP loan. Now, in your independent contractors will be able to apply for a PPP on their own. Okay, anything else, Kenyatta?
Oh yeah, we got a few more. We're gonna go through them as quick as we can. And obviously what we don't have time for, we're gonna respect your time and the attendees' time. So we'll do our best to get as many in as we can. So they say, can you apply for the second PPP without getting the first PPP loan forgiven?
Yes, you do not have to wait for your first PPP to be forgiven in order to apply for the second PPP. The only thing you want to make sure of is that you apply for forgiveness for your first PPP within 10 months of your covered period when that ends.
I think you might have rolled into the next question now, because it says, is there an 8 to 24 waiting period between loans?
I don't know what that means. Okay.
I don't know if they mean like
Because the 8 deals with 8 weeks,
Mhm.
and the 24 deals with 24 weeks. So
Right.
you're choosing your covered period. You either choose to use it for your money over the course of 8 weeks, or you choose to use it over the period of 24 weeks. And then at the last day of your covered period, then that's when your 10 months start for you to apply for forgiveness.
Okay. With the targeted EIDL, since I did receive $2,000, am I correct in understanding that I do not need to do anything, as I should be receiving an email from SBA offering me the opportunity to apply for the remainder in the amount of $8,000?
That's correct. So just keep in mind that in order to be eligible, you must have 300 or fewer employees and live in a low-income community and have suffered a greater than 30% loss in revenues in order to be eligible. But that is correct. You just have to wait to get your email.
Now this question, this is really not a question, I guess, for the person who posted this. If you can, because you're asking for the website address. So are you asking for our website address or for Ms. Joe? So just, type that in the questionnaire, and then I'll be able to address that for you. So there are some online platforms that allow you to apply for both PPP-1 and PPP-2 for Schedule C. Is this allowable?
I am not familiar with any online platforms. Okay, so you're either going to apply with a lender, okay, one of the lenders that's listed in Lender Match, or one of the lenders that's listed in the PPP Lender Find portal. So if you're not in contact with a specific lender, be leery of where you are putting your information. The portal where the application is submitted to SBA is only accessible to the lenders. So if it's anything out there saying we're submitting your application to SBA and it's not one of the approved lenders, then that's not an official site. So be leery of where you're putting your information. My suggestion would be for you to reach out to your lender, and if they're not doing the loans, reach out to one of the lenders that's in Lender Find, that's on the SBA's PPP website, or use sba.gov/lender match. That's the official sites. Don't put your information in anything else. There are a lot of scams out there, a lot of fraud. Don't fall prey to that. Don't fall prey to anybody who's saying they can get a loan for you at X amount of dollars, okay? Because as I mentioned, there's no fee to apply for a PPP, so don't fall prey to any of that, please.
Can we use 2019 tax returns for calculations since 2020 returns are not complete?
Okay, so if you're talking about PPP, yes, you can use your 2019 tax returns for calculations.
One of my clients is an LLC with one owner. She files a Form 1120S, not Schedule C. She is the sole employee of her S Corp. Can we consider her as a self-employed or thus use the 2483 SD-C so that we can use her gross income in the calculation? She has not been paying herself for the last several months due to reduced revenue, using a gross income figure would be more beneficial to her?
The quick answer is no, because that change only applies to Schedule C filers. It does not apply to those who submit a 1065, an 1120S, or an 1120. Their amount is going to be based upon what's in their, I believe it's called a K1. So they'll have to use what's in K1. And if they haven't paid it themselves anything, then there's nothing, and there's nothing reflected in that K1, then there's no amount on which they can base their loan. So no, they cannot use the 2483C or 2483 SDC. No, they cannot.
I have sent my tax information in my personal portal to SBA. When can I expect to hear if I have qualified?
Is this for an EIDL or the targeted EIDL advance?
Well, whoever asked that question would have to put that in the question, because they don't specifically state.
Because as I mentioned before, the processing center for the EIDL advance and the targeted EIDL advance and the EIDL applications is in Fort Worth. So they lost a week or so of processing time. It's hard to tell you when you will hear something. If it's been a while, like several months, not for the targeted EIDL advance, but for the regular EIDL. If it's been several months, like 3 or 4 months, and you haven't heard anything, send me your application number and we'll get someone to check on it.
Are we able to apply for forgiveness for the EIDL loans? Also,
No.
I have, so
No.
the answer to the first is no. Also,
the EIDL is a loan that you have 30 years to repay. So no, it's a loan.
Also, I received an email requesting paying using the 1201, but there was no instructions or details of the terms of the loan.
The terms of the loan were included in your loan documents, which were included in your EIDL portal. So that's where your loan documents were, that loan agreement. So it includes the terms, which are 30 years. And if you're a business, at 3 3/4% interest. And if you're a nonprofit, 30 years at 2 3/4%. But the terms were included in those loan documents that you were asked to sign as a part of your in your loan portal, the EIDL portal. And I don't know if Marsha Ray is on, because she was one of the ones who was detailed to work with our disaster office. So Marjorie, if you don't mind, could you just type in the chat that that's correct or not? But yeah, those loan documents were included in your loan portal. Go ahead, Kenyatta.
Okay. Now we're going to go a few more minutes because we started a few minutes behind. So
we're good.
Oh, we're good. Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
So now this is just someone getting clarification. So those of us that are applying for our first draw, we won't be able to apply for the second PPP unless that date is extended to at least another month. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, a month or so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So they say, Ms. Joe, you stated that you have to apply for forgiveness of a PPP within 10 months of the covered period.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote my bank and they stated the SBA states that you can apply for forgiveness anytime during the term of your PPP loan, which is a minimum of 2 years from the date you received the loan. Am I understanding your statement, or is their response incorrect?
Well, look at their response and make sure you're understanding what they said, because it sounds like they may be speaking to the amount of time that you would have to repay the loan if it's not forgiven. But your forgiveness application must be submitted within 10 months after the last day of your covered period. If you don't meet that, it's going to be converted to a loan. Look back at what the lender said to make sure you're fully understanding. And so if your loan was approved prior to June 5th, then that means that whatever portion is not forgiven, you will have 2 years to repay that loan. So just take a look at what it is that they said, but just know that you have to submit your forgiveness application within 10 months after the end of your covered period.
Several of my clients' lenders have put a hold on accepting PPP forgiveness applications. Is there anything that we can present to them to indicate that they should accept the applications? Or are they being informed that they have to accept forgiveness applications?
It's up to the lenders when they want to start accepting forgiveness applications. Now, we know that under PPP 1, some of the lenders were waiting to see if there were going to be any additional changes or information that came out regarding forgiveness. So they were not accepting forgiveness applications yet. But it's up to the lenders when they want to start accepting forgiveness applications. We can't tell them, yes, you got to start accepting forgiveness applications now. It's up to the lender. As long as they open up their system within your 10 months of submitting your application, then they're fine. You just want to make sure that you have everything ready to go to submit to the lender.
Also, Ms. Marjorie did state that you were correct, Ms. Joe. The
Okay.
information would have been included in their loan package when they received this disbursements.
Thank you, Marjorie.
Right. Let's see. Apparently, many lenders were not updated with the PPP updated information as it relates to the new equitable criteria. With that, what lenders are you recommending to submit the forms 2483 to?
Okay, so we can't recommend a lender. You know, we got over 5,000 lenders who are participating in the PPP. So we cannot recommend one lender over the other. Now, there were some lenders who, when the Biden-Harris administration put out their press release last week that they were instituting these changes, there were those who said, well, we're going to hold our applications from the sole proprietors and not make a decision on those because they were waiting for that additional guidance. So for those who held on to their applications and didn't process them from the Schedule C filers, that was fine. But if they went on and processed it and approved the loan, then there's nothing that can be done at this point because the program is not retroactive.
Two of my clients were declined for EIDL. One of them did submit a reconsideration request within the required time limit in December via mail, email, and fax. However, they've not heard back anything. Is there anything they can do to check on their reconsideration request?
If they want, they can email me their loan application number and I'll get someone to check on it. Email it to jo.lawrence, LAWRENCE, the number 3 at SBA.gov. So email that to me. I'll get someone to check on it and they will respond to you directly and copy me. But like I said, okay, it's just like when we're shut down for hurricanes. We can't do anything. Everything's just shut down. So keep in mind that, you know, we went through that storm in Dallas. And also remember that the reconsideration requests are not given priority. What's given priority are the new applications that are submitted. and then they go back and start looking at the reconsideration request. So send the application number, we'll see what we can find out for you.
Okay. And we got a few more questions, Ms. Joseph. You let me know how we are on time, okay?
Okay, we're good.
Okay. So regarding the consecutive quarters, is there some updated info that speaks to using both quarters in 2020 to calculate the loan, specifically to show loss between two quarters in 2020?
It's between 2019 and 2020. So I didn't say consecutive quarters, I said comparable quarters. So you're going to use a quarter in 2019 and the same quarter in 2020. It's not consecutive quarters.
Can the covered period for the second round PPP be in 2020, even though the loan is received in 2021?
Well, the question will come up, why you didn't use the money in 2020. That would be the question that will come up. But, because the loan, it was not intended for you to hang on to those funds. Rather, the intent was for you to use them to pay your employees. So that would raise a question with the lender and with SBA as to why you did not use the funds in 2020 during either the 8 weeks or the 24 weeks. So the lender may ask you for clarification regarding that. And, they may determine that the loan is not eligible for forgiveness, but the funds were intended to keep your folk working in 2020, or paid rather in 2020.
So this person is want to know if this is a correct understanding of them. Their bank stated that SBA issued Schedule C guidance last night, and the second draw applications with a Schedule C will be delayed due to the new guidance. Is that correct?
That's possible, because that means that what they're going to do is to give you an opportunity to resubmit your application if they have not processed it and approved, and SBA approved it already. So that's possible. It was late yesterday when that information came out, and it just so happened that as soon as it came out, I started reading it, so I'll know what had been done so I could update the presentation. But yeah, that's possible. That's on the lender's part. They're just trying to make sure that they do everything properly and that they have the correct form. So because in addition to updating the borrower's applications, we had to update the lender applications as well. So it is possible.
If your PPP loan is forgiven, can you still use the expense of payroll on your tax return?
Yes, according to the IRS. Now keep in mind, that's an IRS standard. So yes.
Someone asked, could you send us information about the terms about waiting 8 weeks?
Okay, that's in the interim final rules.
Okay.
So, and that's on if you go to sba.gov/PPP, that's on the interim final rules. That's not something that I'm just making up. That's a part of the regulations. And if you look at the Economic Aid Act, it's stated in there clearly that it has to be a minimum of 8 weeks.
All right, they say about the EIDL loan payments. I received a phone call stating the amount of the monthly payment, and I was told that I will receive an email with the terms, but I have not received it. How can I get a copy of my loan docs?
You need to go back into your loan portal. You still have access to your loan portal. You need to go back into your loan portal, your EIDL loan portal, and print those out. And I wasn't aware that anyone was calling anyone unless you called them and they were returning the call. But it's in your loan portal. Go back into your loan portal and print it out.
I received $1,000 from the EIDL, and I have received my targeted advance invite. I have less than 5 employees. What is my next step?
You need to respond to the invitation. you need, by completing the application, you need to submit that form that they provided to you, asking you to provide your gross receipts for 2019, 2020, and 2021 to date. You need to be able to verify that you are in a low income community. You need to verify and make sure that the information on your bank account and what's on the application matches. That includes the name, the routing number, and the account number, and then then submit your application with that supporting information to SBA. And once SBA receives that, we'll come back to you and ask you to complete the form 4506T so that we can request a copy of your transcript for your 2019 tax returns.
Okay, so if you received unemployment for a couple of months and had them taking out taxes prior to sending out weekly payments before applying for and being approved for EIDL and PPP, does the W-2 info for unemployment need to be shown as income on your forms when filing for your second round of PPP or targeted EIDL?
I don't know. I don't know. I know that the unemployment was taxable, and there's been some discussion as to whether or not IRS is going to remove that requirement. So I don't know. Send that one to me, Kenyatta, so I can look it up.
Okay. Follow up to second round PPP received in 2021. Employer received and used first round PPP in 2020. Employer is in process of applying for second round PPP. On the forgiveness application for second round PPP, will employer be able to use a previously uncovered period in 2020, or does second round PPP have to cover a 2021 8 to 24 week period?
The second round 2021 PPP has to cover a period in 2021. It cannot cover a period back in 2020.
What happens when a Schedule C borrower application is also a sole proprietorship, hence small, less than 20 employees, I'm assuming, with the 14-day priority issued from February 24th to March 9th still apply? In other words, is the PPP still priority by March 9th, even though it is a Schedule C?
Yeah, if they have fewer than 20 employees, they'll still be a priority up to March 9th. It's just that on March 9th, applications from all size businesses will be accepted and processed. That 10-day period was just to give some priority to those smallest businesses to get their applications processed ahead of time. Or first, rather.
This will be, this person is just wanting to know if you can remind them how to get into the loan portal.
Okay, you're not going to get into the loan portal. The lender gets into the loan portal. What you need to do is to reach out to your lender to see how you submit an application to them. If your lender is not participating, or you want to find a lender, on the PPP website at sba.gov, there's a link there for lender find. You can click that link and put in a zip code to see what lenders come up who are participating, and then you can reach out to them to submit an application. If you're unable to find a lender in lender find, then you can go to sba.gov/lender match and put your information in there. And if there is a lender in lender match who wants to make your loan, they will reach out to you. But you don't have access to the loan portal. Only the lenders have access to the loan portal.
We got two more, Ms. Joe.
Okay.
The first one, excuse me, for a sole proprietor with no employees, how do we ensure that our loan is forgiven, considering the fact that 100% of the proceeds are prohibited from being used on payroll?
Right. So for a sole proprietor, keep in mind that if you use line 7 or line 31, you're getting 2.5 times whatever that is divided by the 12. Okay. That's to allow for you to be able to pay certain expenses. So that's why you as a sole proprietor cannot use 100% of the proceeds for yourself, for your own salary. Also keep in mind that the maximum that you can be paid as a sole proprietor is $20,833. So you can't use the full amount for your own payroll.
Um, I don't know if this is a continuation to a question they've asked. They're just saying, can I use Schedule C instead of payroll?
Okay, so if for um, the Schedule C filers, okay, you have the option of using line 7 or line 31. So if you use line 31, then you're going to use line 31, which is your net profits, and submit your payroll records. And your amount of loan is going to be based upon what's in your payroll records. Okay. If you choose to use line 7 and you have employees, just know that lines 14, 19, and 26 will be deducted from the amount on line 7 because 14, 19, and 26 deal with employee expenses. So we're not going to allow you to double dip. So that's how you get to use, if you want to use line 7 and you have employees, just know that you're going to deduct lines 14, 19, and 26 from what's on line 7.
All right. And one more, and then anything else that you all may need to have addressed, I will, I've posted my all of my contact information in the chat. And Ms. Joe had hers posted on the screen. I can share it again if I need to. However, you can email me and I can get you in contact with Ms. Joe, as well as forward any questions that you all have. So one more question, and then obviously I'll give Ms. Joe a few more minutes to share with any last minute suggestions or recommendations, any last minute words, and then we'll conclude this. So the last thing that we got for reporting to two same quarters for 2019 and 20, do you show as exhibit a profit and loss comparison for those 2 quarters?
No, you're not showing a profit and loss comparison. What you are showing for those quarters is what your gross receipts were, your gross revenues. Keep in mind what you're trying to demonstrate to the lender and to SBA for the PPP is that you suffered at least a 25% reduction in your gross revenues for those quarters. So you're not showing a profit and loss. You're showing total revenues, total receipts for those quarters. And you get to pick what quarter you want to use in 2019 and compare it to the same quarter in 2020.
Well, any last words, Ms. Joe, that you would like to share with the audience?
Just so everyone will know, and remember that I said this information is covered, is current as of today. As more changes come about or additional guidance is going to be posted on our website at www.sba.gov. The good thing is when you put in www.sba.gov, it brings you to our main website, but also there's a gold banner at the top. And it says, if you're interested in COVID-19 relief, click here. And that takes you over to all of the assistance that's available from SBA. So it covers PPP, it covers the EIDL. It talks about the targeted EIDL advance, the debt relief, and the SVOG has the frequently asked questions there. So if you just click on that link, it'll take you to everything that's available. And as additional information becomes available, that's why we want them to sign up for the updates, because we'll send out our newsletter and also our Gov delivery notices so that they can keep track of what's going on. So we want you to stay in the know and be aware of what's happening with PPP. That's all that I have, Kenyatta. Thank you so much.
Ms. Joe, listen, you know, we've had numerous discussions, so you know how I feel about, what you do. I thank you. Obviously, I know you do a ton of these webinars on a daily basis. So I appreciate you taking, some time out of, your schedule to share this with our attendees.
Okay.
Obviously, going forward, as Ms. Joe stated, y'all can get updates if you go to their site and just and register for it. As well as Ms. Joe does a great job of keeping me informed of the updates as well that I'll be able to send out and keep posted to our website. And again, our website for all that's listening is www.louisianadbe.com, and you spell Louisiana out. If you go and subscribe to it, you will receive all updates as we populate it with new information. So, obviously, man, anybody that's on here that is already DBE certified, please feel free to contact us at any time. We provide free, unlimited assistance to help you in the areas that you want to continue to grow and sustain your business. And obviously, you can see we surround ourselves with like-minded people, as Ms. Joe with SBA. We also, and her staff, they do a great job of keeping me on top of everything, as well as, I got Ms. Ada Bell that's at LSBDC and her staff. We got Daryl Johnson at LED, Ms. Joyce James, Ms. Cindy Carrier with PTAC. We have an ecosystem of agencies that are on one accord, and that's to make sure that you all are winning with all of the information that we can provide you with, and it's free. And in a few, I wonder what time, at 6 o'clock today, we're going to be doing another webinar. It's going to be talking about other ways that you can scale yourself up with certifying programs. I'm excited about that. Ms. Joe has been gracious to be on that panel with us as well. And I'm going to have Ms. Savitri Wilson with Solid Ground Innovation. She's going to be hosting it. So we got some great information for that also. If you're able to, I highly recommend you attend that because it would definitely be some more great information for you. So in conclusion, again, thank you for taking time out of your calendar, Ms. Joe. Thank you all who attended. We know there's a lot going on, but hopefully this information that you gathered today was worth your time. And so that concludes our webinar today. Again, anybody that has any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll make sure to get all that information over to Ms. Joe and her staff. And thank you, Ms. Marjorie, for being on. We appreciate you.
Thank you, guys. Okay, Kenyatta, take care.
All right, y'all have a blessed day. Y'all be safe.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.